This is chapter 9, verse 60. And this section is subtitled appropriately, The Hypocrites. The English translation of this verse is: charity or zakat is only for the poor and the needy and those employed to administer it, and those whose hearts are made to incline to the truth and to free the captives, and those in debt and in the way of Allah, and for the traveller, an ordinance from Allah. And Allah is knowing and He is wise. There is two types of charity in Islam. There is voluntary charity or zakat, and there is the charity mentioned here, which is generally known as zakat, and it is also regarded as one of the pillars of Islam. And what I call it is the forgotten pillar of Islam, because there is so much emphasis on salat and Saum and Hajj that we talk about this all the time. I was in Holland and someone asked me, I have a problem. I said, what's the problem? And he said, I'm an MD, I'm not allowed to go to Hajj. And this is one of the basic principles, one of the pillars of Islam. So I cannot fulfill my duty because of this. So I said to him, do you give zakat? And he looked at me as if he was asking, what do you mean? I said to him, something that you're supposed to do once in a lifetime, if you have the means to do it, and if there is safety and security on the way and when you get there. You're so upset that you may not be allowed to fulfill that duty that you're supposed to do once in a lifetime. But the duty that you're supposed to do every day, and certainly once a year, you seem to neglect that. The duty that no one can stop you from doing, you forget that. And you concentrate only on the one thing that you cannot do. There is a very easy principle to living a successful life, and that is, do the things that you can. And don't worry about the things that you can't. Because if you keep worrying about the things that you can't do, you won't even do those things that you can, as was the case with this friend of mine. This is a very important pillar of Islam. Why? Because in this way we try and raise those people who are in the poorer social strata of society, and we try and raise their level. We try and alleviate and eliminate their distress and their needs and their problems. But in another place, the Holy Quran also tells us something about giving in charity. You cannot attain to righteousness unless you spend out of what you love. Allah surely knows it. So this charity we give, whether it's voluntary charity or whether it's the compulsory zakat, because this one here, this verse at the end says, zakat is only for, and it then lists people, it says, this is God's command to you. It doesn't say if you feel like it, do it. It says this is God's command, you have to do it. If you're worried about the fact that God has commanded that you perform the Hajj and you can't do it, well, this is also God's command that you should be doing. And in the other verse that I recited to you, which is chapter 3, verse 91, it says, sacrifice those things that you love. And just think about this. These two simple verses, just think about them. If everyone who claims to be a Muslim in the whole world, they followed this commandment of the Holy Quran, to give charity, to sacrifice for the sake of others those things we love. And what do we love most of all? We love money. We love wealth. We love things that to wear so that when people see them they say, oh, look at him, look at her. On every party she has a new dress. For every party she has a new hairstyle. For every party she has new shoes. We want to associate ourselves with Amanda Marcos and not Mother Teresa. Well, if that is our attitude, then we should not pretend that we are righteous. You see, if you pray, that's for yourself. If you fast, that's for yourself. If you go to Hajj, that's for yourself. The only pillar of Islam that requires you to do something for others is zakat. And it shows how selfish we are. It shows how little place there is in our hearts for God and love of humanity, that this is the one thing that we ignore. All over the world, if we are conscientious about Islam and zakat and charity, what do? We find some means, some excuse to avoid having to pay that. You play with words. You say it's fine if you are in the court of law of this world, that you play with the words of some constitution or some statute or some rule that your local council or someone else has made to get your own way. But will God really let you play with His ordinances and His commands and His words when you are asked about them on the Day of Judgment? How important the charities can be seen from this saying of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he said, it is unlawful for you to go to sleep until and unless you go and find out from your neighbor whether he has had an evening meal. This is how much importance Islam lays on charity and fellow feeling and love for humanity. And this is one thing that we always forget and we always ignore. If all the Muslims in the whole world honestly just gave zakat every year, there will not be one single poor Muslim in the whole world. There will not be one single unemployed Muslim in the whole world. There will not be one single Muslim whose ailment or illness or disease will go untreated in the whole world. There will not be one single Muslim who will be in debt to someone in the whole world. How much is God asking you? How much is it that God is asking you to give up? He is asking you to keep 97.5% of what you have spared. Not your gross income. 97%, 97.5%, and you give 2.5%. From what? You paid your taxes, you paid your national insurance, you paid your mortgage, you bought your clothes, you bought your food, you paid your gas, you paid your electricity, you paid your council tax. Everything you have paid, and after that what you have left, God says, out of that keep 97.5%, and I ask for just 2.5%. And that rankles us. And we are not prepared to do that. So why do we complain and ask why God has forsaken us? He hasn't forsaken us. We have forsaken Him. We play with His commandments. When it comes to giving zakat, we play with His commandments. Do you think the mosque in Berlin was built and run if this small Jamaat, members of this small Jamaat, hadn't meticulously given zakat and paid the 6% that Hazrat Sahaba had asked for? Just a handful of people. Do you think that Working Muslim Mission could have been run and Islamic Review, the magazine, produced, and 2 or 3 imams paid their salaries? If every single member of this Jamaat hadn't paid their zakat and the amount subscribed by Hazrat Masih Maudullah Sallam. Just look at it. This is not a story from days gone by. I'm not telling you a fable that just by giving of this zakat at the time of Hazrat Umar Raziyallahu Ta'ala and Hazrat Usman Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu, Muslims became so well off that they would go out looking for people in need to give zakat to, and they would not find it. I'm not telling you stories of 1500 years ago. I'm telling you about the history of 100 years ago. How many MDs were there? A handful. And what did they finance? They built a mosque in Berlin. They built a mission house in Berlin. They placed an imam there. They paid his salary and the running expenses of that mosque and the mosque in Woking. And they financed the printing of books in English and Urdu and God knows what other language. Can you not see how important this command is and how important it is that we faithfully fulfill it? There are many tricks that you can use to get around charity, and some of them I've mentioned, like the one at the end of the year you must have in your account. So a week before the year ends, you transfer the money to your wife's account. And you say, oh well, strictly speaking, the law says I should have this money for 52 weeks. I've only had it for 51 weeks. And of course, no zakat is due on the wife because she's only had the money for 1 week. Of course, I like the wife who once the money had been transferred into her account, and the following year the husband said, well, can you transfer it back? And she said, no, I prefer to keep the money and I'll pay the zakat on that. But if you're going to use those tricks, if you're going to play with the law, then fine. It satisfies your conscience, okay, fine. But I would say to you that if it satisfies your conscience, you don't have a conscience. Your conscience is actually dead. If you simply follow the simple commands of the Holy Quran, Muslims throughout the world will progress. You will be helping others. You see, if you look at it, as some of the things we see in our own time, what is happening out in society? Those who are poor and those who are needy, they're going to payday loans. I won't mention the names of any companies. You see them often enough on television. What does God say here? Help them. Give them something. People in debt, freeing of slaves, new Muslims. We all gather and we clap. When someone embraces Islam, we all gather and we clap. Nowadays, some people say they've reverted to Islam. Well, perhaps. What do we do after that? My own brother-in-law, he couldn't get a job because he embraced Islam and he changed his name to Salim Ahmed. So we did an experiment. We sent 2 CVs out to I think 3 or 4 employers. One used the name Salim Ahmed, one used the name Paul Johnson. Paul Johnson was invited to interviews and Salim Ahmed was told, sorry, you don't qualify. So what are we going to do? Are we going to help him? God says here, help him. Can be used for propagation of Islam. Can be used for travelers, people who get stuck somewhere. And the interesting thing is, although jurists say that it can only be used for Muslims, in the verses of the Holy Quran itself, the word Muslim is not used. Charity is for the poor. Doesn't say Muslim poor. Charity is for the needy. It does not say Muslim needy. Charity is for those whose hearts are made to incline to Islam, those who are new Muslims, those in debt. It doesn't say those Muslims who are in debt. And for the traveler, it doesn't say Muslim traveler. God does not discriminate. Can you see if we all paid this zakat properly, regularly, not only Muslims, there'll be no poor person left in the world. There'll be no one left in the world who cannot get education. There'll be no one left in the world who cannot get medical treatment. But if you're going to play with God's commands, then we are the ones who lose out and we are the ones who suffer. We still have an incomplete project in New Delhi. As you know, last year, India Jamaat embarked on 2 projects. One was to build a mosque and a school in Bihar, which has been completed, and I think 350 children are now getting education in that school. But New Delhi is extremely expensive, and that project is stuck because of lack of resources. It is for us to provide those resources. It is for us to remember that there was a time when Ahmadis would save up money for their daughter's dowry. And when Hazrat Maulana Muhammad Ali would make an appeal for a foreign mission or a mosque or a translation of the Holy Quran, they would give that money for propagation of Islam. And their daughters too would say, it is more important that that money is used to glorify the name of Allah in foreign lands than buy me jewelry and silks and so on. This is our legacy. This is what we have to live up to. When we look in the mirror, we should ask ourselves, do we deserve to be called Ahmadis? Ahmadis were distinct from others in what? In that they made every sacrifice for the cause of Islam. There were Ahmadis who were self-employed. There was a gentleman called Dr. Asmatullah. And as you know, people paid to consult doctors in the days of old. Every time someone paid him, he had a little like savings box. He would calculate the amount that needed to go in there and he'd put it in there. With every single patient, someone asked him why. And he said, in case I forget and I miss out something and I displease my God because I keep money for myself, that is His due. Ask yourself. God demands of you only 2.5%. He says, after meeting all your desires, what is left, even out of that you can keep 97.5%. And you're still not prepared to give that. Then ask yourself, do you really think in all consciousness you should complain when God turns away from you? We are approaching the end of Ramadan. And one of the lessons of Ramadan is for us to make sacrifices for others. So let us pray that God opens our hearts to make sacrifices for Him and in His cause.